In the summer of 2022, I was visiting a friend in Arizona when we decided to do something reckless. We had always been into urban exploration, old buildings, ghost towns, forgotten places with histories no one talked about anymore. My friend had heard about an abandoned motel on the outskirts of town, a place that had been shut down in the early 90s after a series of disappearances. The police never found anything, and over time, the place was just left behind. It was supposed to be a quick in-and-out trip, just to look around, snap some pictures, and leave. The motel sat alone in the desert, the sun-baked structure crumbling against the dry wind. The faded sign still hung above the entrance, half the letters missing. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. That heaviness in the air. The kind that makes your skin feel too tight, like the whole building is waiting for something. The lobby was frozen in time, dust-covered furniture, an old reception desk with a cracked bell still sitting on top. A row of keys hung behind the counter, untouched. We split up, my friend heading toward the old bar while I wandered down the hallway lined with rooms. Most of the doors were open, revealing empty, decayed spaces. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpets brittle with age. Some rooms had suitcases still inside, clothes spilling from them, as if people had left in a hurry. Then about halfway down the hall, I found room 109. Unlike the others, the door was closed. Something about it unsettled me. The number plate was scratched like someone had tried to rip it off. The handle was covered in black smudges. I hesitated before pushing the door open. The room was dark, too dark. The motel had windows in every room, but the curtains in this one were drawn so tightly that barely any light got through. The air was heavy, stale, carrying a scent I couldn't quite place, something like metal. Then I saw it, a mirror. It stood against the far wall, a large, old-fashioned thing with an ornate frame. The glass was pristine, too clean for a room that had been abandoned for decades. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed something was wrong. My reflection was off. It moved with me, but the timing was delayed. I lifted my arm, and for a split second my reflection did nothing. Then it slowly followed. My breath hitched. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard it. A breath, not mine. I spun around. The mirror. The reflection wasn't me anymore. It was someone else. A figure standing in the same position, but with empty eyes, sunken features, and a twisted grin. I bolted. I don't remember running down the hall, past the rooms, past my friend yelling my name. I burst into the lobby, pushing through the doors into the blinding afternoon sun. Only when I reached the car did I realize I had been holding my breath. My friend came out seconds later, confused and asking what happened. I couldn't speak. I just pointed back at the building. But when I looked up, room 109 wasn't there. The hallway I had just been in ended in a solid wall. There was no door, no number, no room. We left immediately. Later that night I checked the photos on my phone. Most were normal, just shots of the lobby and the empty bar. But then I found the last one. I don't remember taking it. It was a picture of the hallway, and standing at the end was a figure, tall, hollow-eyed, grinning, and behind it the door to room 109. In the fall of 2021, I was traveling through Pennsylvania for work when I found myself with an unexpected day off. I'd always been interested in abandoned places, and I had heard about an old mental hospital on the outskirts of town that had been shut down for decades. No one ever went there anymore, at least not legally. Something about places like that intrigued me. Forgotten buildings, lost history, places left to rot. I drove out there alone, following a cracked road until the trees thinned and the structure loomed into view. The hospital was massive, its windows black and hollow. The chain-link fence surrounding it had been cut open, an obvious entry point for explorers like me. The second I stepped through, a wave of stillness hit me. The air was different inside the property, too quiet. The front doors were heavy, but they creaked open with minimal effort, like something was waiting for me. Inside, the main hall was littered with debris. Old patient files, broken furniture, pieces of ceiling that had collapsed over time. The place smelled like dust and something else. Something faintly metallic. I walked deeper inside, my footsteps echoing against peeling walls. Most of the rooms had been stripped bare, their contents either stolen or decayed beyond recognition. I turned into one of the old patient wards, rows of rusted bed frames lined up like silent witnesses to a past no one wanted to remember. Some beds still had restraints attached to them. I checked my phone. No signal. Typical. Further down the hall, I found what used to be the nurse's station. Cabinets lined the walls, most of them broken or empty. I rummaged through them, curious, and found something strange. A set of keys. They were old, rusted, but still intact, hanging neatly on a hook. Someone had put them there. A soft click echoed down the hallway. I froze. It wasn't the building settling, it was deliberate, like a door unlocking. My skin prickled as I turned, scanning the dim corridor. All the doors had been open when I passed through, but now one was closed. I swallowed hard. It hadn't been locked before. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. The small plaque on the door was so faded I could barely read it, but I could make out the words, Ward B, long-term patients. I reached out, my fingers grazing the handle. It was cold, too cold. The air felt thicker here, heavy in a way that pressed down on my chest. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The door swung inward, revealing a room that shouldn't have been there. Unlike the decayed hospital around me, this room was untouched. The walls were pristine, the bed neatly made, a wheelchair sitting in the corner like someone had just stepped away. There was no dust, no debris. It was as if time had never touched this place. And then I saw the chair. A simple wooden chair positioned in the center of the room, facing me, and on it sat a single Polaroid photograph. My blood ran cold as I stepped closer, hesitating before picking it up. It was a picture of me, standing right there in the doorway. My hands shook as I flipped the photo over. In smudged, faded ink, a message was written. "You looked long enough." I felt it then, a presence, a shift in the air. I turned back toward the hallway, every nerve in my body screaming, and that's when I saw the shadow. Not my shadow, something taller, behind me. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted down the hallway, my breath ragged, my pulse hammering. The halls felt longer than before, stretching endlessly as my footsteps echoed. I could hear something behind me, not running, just walking, steady, unrushed. By the time I reached the main doors, I could barely breathe. I shoved them open, stumbling into the daylight, gasping as I turned back. The hallway was empty. Nothing, no movement, just the dark, rotting building standing silent and still. I sprinted to my car, throwing myself inside, locking the doors even though I knew it was pointless. My hands shook as I checked my phone. Still no signal. But there was a new photo in my camera roll, one I hadn't taken. It was a picture of the hospital hallway, taken from inside, facing the doors, as if someone had been watching me leave. In the winter of 2022, I was helping my cousin move out of his apartment in Detroit. The place he lived in was part of an old, mostly abandoned building, a relic from the 1920s that had somehow avoided demolition. Most of the floors were empty, the walls cracked, the windows covered in grime. Only a handful of tenants remained, scattered across different levels. My cousin was one of the last to leave. We had spent the whole day packing, carrying boxes down the dimly lit stairwell because the elevator had stopped working years ago. The place had a dead feeling to it, as if it had already been forgotten before people even left. Every hallway smelled like dust and something faintly damp, like time itself was rotting the building from the inside. By the time we finished, the sun had set, and the only light came from a flickering bulb in the main hallway. We were exhausted, but there was still one thing left to do: lock up his old unit. His apartment was on the 7th floor. We had already hauled everything down, so we decided to take one last trip up just to make sure we hadn't forgotten anything. The stairwell was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones despite being inside. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally. As we reached the 7th floor, something felt off. The hallway was longer than I remembered. The peeling wallpaper looked different, like it was shifting. The air was thick, stale, like we had stepped into a place that hadn't been disturbed in years. The strangest part, one of the doors at the far end of the hall was open, a room that, as far as I knew, had been vacant for years. A light was on inside. We both stopped, exchanging uneasy glances. There was no reason for any light to be on. Electricity had been spotty in the building, and the last tenant in that unit had moved out 5 years ago. My cousin hesitated, then shook his head. "Let's just grab my stuff and go," he muttered, brushing past me. I nodded, forcing my feet to move toward his apartment. We stepped inside his unit, and the second we did, the door slammed shut behind us. Neither of us had touched it. A jolt of panic shot through me. My cousin rushed forward, yanking at the knob. It wouldn't budge. He turned the lock, but it wouldn't turn. We were trapped, Then the lights went out. The apartment was swallowed in darkness. My breath came fast, my hands fumbling for my phone. The second I turned on the flashlight, I felt it. We weren't alone. Something shifted in the farthest corner of the room, a shape, too tall, too thin. My cousin and I both saw it at the same time. He whispered, "Do you see that?" But I couldn't answer. The shape moved, slowly, deliberately. The light from my phone flickered like something was draining it. The air was wrong, pressing in on me like static. My cousin gripped my arm, his breath ragged. "We need to get out," he whispered. Then we heard it, a scraping sound, something dragging against the floor. Not fast, not rushed, slow, like whatever was in that room knew we had nowhere to go. My cousin reached for his phone, but the second he pulled it out, it shut off. No battery. My flashlight flickered again, dimming. The scraping sound got closer. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and threw it toward the shape. The second it made contact, the light snapped back on. The room was empty. No shape, no sound. Just the two of us alone. The door creaked open on its own. The hallway outside was pitch black. We didn't question it. We ran. By the time we made it downstairs, my cousin was shaking. We looked back up at the building, at the windows of the 7th floor. One window still had a light on. The same room that had been open earlier. We never found out what was in that apartment, and I never asked. My cousin refused to talk about it. He moved to a new city, cut all ties with that building, but sometimes late at night I wonder, if we had stayed in the dark just a little longer, would we have ever gotten out? Some places are abandoned for a reason. If these stories sent chills down your spine like this video, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more terrifying true horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because some doors, once opened, never close again.